Legislature Legislature in Guam is back in session. Buenas mañanas y todos, colleagues. We resume on the second reading file on Bill number 27-37 COR. Majority Leader Senator Shelton, you are recognized.
Sedis Masi, Madam Speaker, I move to place Bill number 27-37 COR aside at this time.
There's a motion to set Bill number 27-37 COR, sponsored by Tina Rose Munoz Barnes, aside. Is there any objection? Seeing no objection, motion carries. We are now on resolution number 21-37 COR. Majority Leader Senator Shelton, you are recognized.
Sedis Masi, Madam Speaker, I move to set aside resolution number 21-37 COR, sponsored by Tina Rose Munoz Barnes and others at this time.
On that motion, is there any objection? Seeing no objection, motion carries. We're now on resolution number 30-37 COR. Majority Leader Shelton, you are recognized.
Sedis Masi, Madam Speaker, I move to set aside resolution number 30-37 COR, sponsored by Tina Rose Munoz Barnes and others at this time.
On that motion to set aside resolution 30-37, is there any objection? Seeing no objection, motion carries. We've exhausted our second reading file for the day.
Madam Speaker, I request that we go back to motions.
On that motion to go back to motions, is there any objection? Seeing no objection, motion carries.
Madam Speaker, I requested to go back to motions, notwithstanding the House rules, to place on the session agenda resolution number 6737 LS, introduced by Thomas J. Fisher, Frank F. Blas Jr., Jesse A. Lujan, Joanne Brown, Tello T. Tadegui, Chris Barnett, Christopher M. Duenas, and it's relative to the 37th Guam Legislature Standing Rules 11.10 to establish a special investigating committee to investigate a potential attempt to corruptly and criminally influence the legislative debate of resolution of the legislature in Guam taking place on or about March 21, 23. Madam Speaker, this is basically a resolution that otherwise would be adopted by the Rules Committee. It is not substantive in terms of requiring public hearing, and it is part of our regular duties as stated in the standing rules. So at this time, I move that it be placed on the agenda for debate and voting in this session. Sedis Masi, Madam Chair.
Sedis Masi, Senator Duenas, on the motion to place resolution number 67-37 LS on the session agenda, there has been an objection. This is resolution number 67-37, introduced by Senator Fisher and others, relative to the 37th Guam Legislature Standing Rule 11.10 to establish special investigating committee to investigate a potential attempt to corruptly and criminally influence the legislative debate of a legislature in Guam taking place on or about March 21, 2023. On the motion to place resolution number 67-37 on the agenda, there has been an objection to placing resolution number 67-37 on the session agenda. Clerk, please take the roll.
Senator Barnett. Yes. Senator Barnett, aye. Senator Blas. Senator Blas, aye. Senator Brown. Senator Brown, aye. Senator Duenas. Senator Duenas, aye. Senator Fisher. Senator Fisher, aye. Senator Lujan. Senator Lujan, aye. Vice Speaker Munoz Barnes.
I move to excuse those not present for voting today.
On the motion to excuse those not present for voting, any objection? Motion carries.
Vice Speaker Munoz Barnes, excuse. Senator Parkinson. Senator Parkinson, nay. Senator Perez. Senator Perez, nay. Senator Kanata. Senator Kanata, nay. Senator San Augustine. Senator San Augustine, nay. Senator Sinicolas. Senator Sinicolas, aye. Senator Shelton. Senator Shelton, nay. Senator Tadegui. Senator Taitigui, pass. Speaker Terlahi. Speaker Terlahi, nay. Senator Taitigui. Senator Taitigui, pass. Senator Taitigui. Senator Taitigui, aye.
With 8 ayes and 6 nays, motion carries. Resolution number 67-37 LS has been added to the session agenda. We are in motions, colleagues. Speaker Terlahi, you are recognized.
Madam Speaker, notwithstanding the objections of Imagat Hagan Guahan, I move to place vetoed bill number 12-37 COR in the voting file for an override. Vetoed bill number 12-37 COR, as amended on the floor, is an act to amend section 60112 of chapter 60, title 21, Guam Code annotated, relative to requiring prior approval from the legislature before purchasing or entering into a lease, license, or sublease of property owned by the federal government, foreign government, or sub-entities thereof for a term in excess of 5 years. And I would ask that I be allowed to speak on this motion.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. Please proceed.
Bill 12 was passed unanimously by this body. It is a practical measure that does one thing. It requires the approval of the legislature for leases with the federal government longer than 5 years, allowing the disclosure of what the people of Guam will be obligated to for decades. Bill 12 would govern all future leases and all property still held by the military or the federal government, regardless of who is the governor. It would require any governor to get consensus from the legislature as to leases with the federal government. There has been a campaign launched against the override of this bill, but I can't help but wonder what bill it is that's being discussed. As I read accounts in the media, the form letters being sent by the governor's staff to me and other senators, some letters from my colleagues, and statements by the governor. So I would like to state for the record what Bill 12-37 does not do. The bill does not oppose a hospital. It does not mean that there will be no new hospital or that we will lose the new hospital. The bill does not purport to give the land back to those of ancestral claims, and the landowners know this. The bill does not endanger the health and well-being of the people of Guam, as was stated in the governor's veto message. The bill was not introduced to obstruct, effectuate a political agenda, nor to seek direct control over executive branch functions, which was also contained in the governor's veto message. The bill does not mean that senators don't care or that they are victimizing these families, or that senators are scapegoating anyone as a villain, also asserted in the governor's veto message. The 5-page veto letter contained some personal attacks against members of this body. But what was that for? the bill would simply require legislative approval of leases, mandating more scrutiny for deals being made on behalf of the people of Guam and our children and our grandchildren. Leases of land, such as the one unprecedented, such as Lalu. And who knows what other lands listed as excess by the Secretary of the Navy will be subject to some other lease to bypass the process of return by the federal government. No legislature before us has shied away from approving leases of government land over 5 years, approving indebtedness for bonds and schools and other obligations with much shorter time frames and far less than $1 billion obligations. Courts continue to say that the appropriation power belongs to the legislature pursuant to the Organic Act. The legislature must consent to the government being bound for future payments. Even Congress requires submission and review of long-term military leases. Why shouldn't the Guam legislature similarly review? Why shouldn't the legislature provide the checks and balances that all 15 of us were elected to do on behalf of the people of Guam? It's a simple yet necessary review. It will protect the people of Guam from overbearing debt. Another YTK or Max Havit type of deal. It will embed another opportunity for the people of Guam to protect against corruption and to pursue justice in regards to lands originally taken from the people of Guam. And the people of Guam are the ones who will build and finance the hospital with their hard work and their taxes, and are the only ones who will be left on the hook for what these leases will entail after all of us, the governor, the lieutenant governor, all of us senators have completed our terms in office. And we owe it to these people of Guam to do our job and not look the other way. To rent property for its own uses, the government of Guam normally solicits competition and value under the procurement law. The use of federal property is not competitive and is not currently vetted for value under the procurement law. And without any competition or insured value or previous authorization by the legislature, it is fundamental to a healthy government that the legislature review the proposed 50-year obligation that was negotiated in secret by one person. And it is a lie that the lease is free. From what we can see from the draft that we just received recently, under the governor's proposal, Guam must pay rent at almost $1 million a year for 50 years. Additionally, according to the lease, the military has specific requirements Guam must comply with, but those will not be fully disclosed until after the lease is signed. The people of Guam will pay this rent from our business and income taxes. And even if all the remaining $300,000 in ARP funds are used on the hospital, $300 million in ARP funds are used on the hospital, the government of Guam will still go into debt for possibly 30 to 50 years to finance over $100 million in infrastructure and the $1 billion hospital building itself. And all the other promises made that without this bill, we will not see until we are bound to them. The people of Guam also will bear the cost for the maintenance, the recruitment and retention of health professionals, despite a nationwide shortage, incentivizing them with higher pay, scholarships and tax breaks, and immunity. Why should we trust the details to the military? Why are those details not going to be presented until after the lease is signed? We couldn't trust them to keep their promises of the net negative land use or to return excess lands to the government of Guam. The lease was negotiated seemingly in contravention of several promises made by the military and Congress to the people of Guam. First, that the military footprint after the buildup of Marines would be smaller than when it started, and that excess land would be returned to the government of Guam. The net negative promise. Second, that the Secretary of the Navy would follow the 2014 NDAA process to identify and agree to the return of excess lands to the government of Guam. The Lalu land, or the Eagles Field, was listed by the Secretary of the U.S. Navy as eligible for return to the territory of Guam, and that's a quote, pursuant to the 2014 NDAA congressional process. And thus, it should be returned to the government of Guam if this is indeed where we want to build a hospital. Did the Secretary of Navy change his mind? We have FOIA'd the government, the governor, and there is no document that exists that indicates that. So I have asked, can we get this in writing, instead of the Admiral of the Joint Region Marianas going to the media to tell us we took all of the land that had been listed as excess but had not started the process of transfer, and we removed it from the excess list. He also stated there are no excess lands. I've asked, the promise of net negative was made in 2010, that was 13 years ago, but the disregard of the Secretary of the Navy's letters and the threat to our governor that if we do not sign this lease within 30 days, we lose the land again, I find unconscionable. And senators, even though he threatened us, do not turn your back on any chance for these landowners and all the other landowners. They are still hoping for a return, and we do not need to give up all of their rights of those landowners in order to build a hospital. They have sacrificed and are still hoping for a return. Another promise was made in the 2010 and the 2015 environmental impact statements, where they pointed out adverse and disproportionate impacts on public health and social services to low-income populations on Guam, and to the lack of availability of affordable housing that is already occurring because of the military buildup. And 13 years later, we still wait for those mitigation efforts to address the impact on our community. Former Congressman Robert Underwood, in a March 23 PDN article titled Rear Admiral Benjamin Nicholson and the Fourth Branch of Government in Guam, wittily weighs in, stating, quote, he has told us that there would be no more excess land and that previous net negative understandings have been overtaken by the need for a missile defense system. A double cross on the net negative does not yield a net positive, unquote. I would also like to note that in addition to other properties that were listed, the Guam Ancestral Lands testified at an oversight for the medical campus last year that there were 1,400 acres available in the land bank that could be used for other purposes, such as a medical campus. I am not aware of the disposition of these properties, but we have been advised by the director that it was suggested and ultimately not chosen. I'm unaware of the discussions or the decision that was made to opt out of land that the government already owns, which would have provided Guam its autonomy on the hospital in order to lease land, instead of leasing land from the federal government while the military mandates what is required as part of the lease. We've heard a few bits and pieces of the lease in the media, including the provisions that the government of the United States shall have the right to terminate this lease in whole or in part without liability and regardless of any lack of breach by lessee of any of the terms and conditions of this lease upon 90-day notice to lessee. That's us, the government of Guam, we're the lessee. Or that the United States government may terminate within 90 days if premises are required for federal use. And the United States retains easements over, across, in, and upon the leased premises, and many other things. But as I note this, I can't help but be concerned that if this veto isn't overridden, this is the closest thing that the public may see to the proper public vetting of this lease, this obligation, and what we are committing to for decades. And I want to reiterate that this legislature, and more importantly, the people of Guam, have had no true input to this proposed lease for federal land that is being signed, nor has there been any opportunity to date, despite a task order for the GITA consultant to give at least 2 presentations to policymakers and host at least 2 forums for the medical and public health industries before August 2022. Without public input, I think we should bear in mind that the federal land that we're talking about was taken from the people of Guam also without public input. We are being asked to look the other way on a lease where the details as to what Guam will be mandated to build, the services Guam will be mandated to provide, and the in-kind payment that might be acceptable in lieu of $1 million a year will be disclosed only after the signing. Would any legislature do that without asking questions? Should the governor not be required to seek approval from the co-equal branch of government before proceeding with such a significant obligation? The people of Guam are entitled to know what is being negotiated on their behalf, especially when it comes to land agreements involving deals made with the federal government at the cost of the people of Guam. And if the military's deal is the great deal the governor wants us to believe it is, I have promised her that we can discuss the details immediately after this override. And approval of the federal lease, if it is good for Guam, should be a slam dunk. We will be able to see the details and decide if there are too many unknowns, or whether we can safely bind the government for $1 million a year after they said it was for free, if we can afford the military's construction, service, and equipment requirements that are not yet disclosed, but that Guam is agreeing to by signing the lease.
Madam
Or if the
Speaker.
people of Guam are okay with a lack of details as to exactly what is meant by in-kind services that may be used to offset the $1 million.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Your time is, please wrap up.
Thank you. If Bill 12 is overridden, the hospital will still be built. The proposed lease of federal land can be reviewed with haste. We can continue to negotiate with the military for use of land it controls. We can consider, again, the use of our own land already set aside for a hospital, or the 1,400 acres of Spanish Crown lands in the Land Bank inventory, as suggested by the director of the Ancestral Lands Commission. This bill does not lessen the legislature's commitment to funding a hospital or the
Thank
urgency
you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, your time's up.
with which we must work together. And so I ask the legislature to support us in shining light on this.
Order,
on these
Madam
leases.
Chair.
Thank you.
For the 3rd time, her time is up.
Thank you. On the motion, notwithstanding the governor's veto, to override the governor's veto of bill number 12-37, discussion. Anyone on the override? Senator Parkinson, you are recognized.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I voted for this bill because this bill would give this body a legislative mechanism to kill the hospital if we did not like it, did not like the terms of it. And from the beginning, I have always supported the landowners. So I voted for this bill because I believed at the time, because of the testimony of some of this body, that if we obstructed the hospital, it would give the original landowners an opportunity to get their land back. And so, yes, I voted for this bill. But then I had an opportunity to speak with the Admiral. And in that opportunity, I asked him point blank, Do these people have a chance to get their land back? Is there any possibility at all? And the Admiral told me point blank it was impossible for them to get their land back. And it's with that new information that I cannot support this override. Because if the choice is either a new, badly needed hospital or not, I cannot, in good conscience, not support a new hospital. And for this bill directly says we have the ability to override. This override decides if a hospital will be built or not. So that's the simple
Point of
question.
order, Madam Speaker. The bill does not state that anywhere in this bill. It is a bill to approve federal leases.
Thank you for your point of order, Speaker Terlahi. Speaker
Speaker
Parkinson.
Talai, if we don't appoint the lease, will that kill the hospital?
Senator Parkinson, please address the chair. This is discussion
I'll yield to
on
that
the
question.
notwithstanding
And you-
override. If you would like to raise a point of inquiry, please state so.
I would like to raise a point of inquiry to Speaker Terlahi. If we were to vote no, ma'am, if we were to vote no, thank you, sir, for correction on protocol. I appreciate that. Madam Chair, if we were to vote no on this lease, if this bill override were to go through, would that kill the hospital at that location?
Speaker
if we
Terlahi,
voted no.
Do you yield to the question?
Yes, I gladly yield to this question because this question is really, it's the root of the misunderstandings that are going on in our community. The bill before us that we're trying to override says that legislative approval will be required of all federal leases. It does not mention a hospital. It does not bring in a lease for the hospital. It in no way brings us the details of the lease for the hospital, which is the issue that we are trying to do, to bring that lease down and have it vetted by the people of Guam and by the Guam Legislature before we enter into, or someone enters into, on all of our behalf, the huge obligations that might be included in this lease or any other lease. So this bill does not impact the hospital. It impacts any and all federal leases with the government of Guam exceeding 5 years.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you.
So as she says, this body will have legislative consent over all federal leases over 5 years. My fear is if we pass this override, no hospital location will ever get legislative approval. There are some in this body that choose to look at partnership with the military in a negative light. But this is a win-win situation. Partnership with the military guarantees that we will have a fast and responsible partnership that makes sure that we get this hospital up in a timely manner with all of its P's and Q's minded. Not only will we have help towards a hospital and federal funds, we will have a Veterans Care Center right on this island. And as somebody who has had to travel many, many times as a caretaker for a 100% disabled veteran, having that center here on island is something that I cannot ignore and vote against. Any place we put a hospital has its pros and cons. Lalo is the fastest and the one that we are most likely to get federal funds with. We need to recognize our role in the world. The threat of China is ever present and looming over us like the sword of Damocles. We have been called many things here on Guam. The unsinkable carrier, the tip of the spear, where America's day begins. I don't like those names. I don't want to be the tip of the spear. I did not ask, no one in this island asked to be in that situation, and it is not right. But it doesn't change the reality on the ground that we have this massive threat on the horizon and we need to prepare. And we need to prepare in partnership with the U.S. military to make sure we have the adequate health care and defenses needed for when that dark day comes. I urge this body to move with urgency and recognize the reality that we can't keep pushing this off because we have a serious threat on the horizon. I know we all want to do well for the island. And so I ask the members of this body to please not support this override because we need a new hospital and we need it in partnership with the U.S. military. And let's put down the rhetoric and work in partnership with them and get it done because our island needs it. I know a lot of people don't like the American military, but there is always going to be a military on Guam, whether it's the American military or the Chinese military. And if I had to choose, I would choose American every day. And I ask this body to join me in that and help a new hospital be built. With that, I yield the rest of my time.
Thank you. Senator Parkinson, on the discussion, notwithstanding the override of vetoed bill number 12-37. Any senator wishing to speak? Senator Perez, you are recognized.
Half a day. Thank you, Madam Speaker. Chamorros have this saying, "Ti anok itza papapa," which means the bottom is not visible. And it's important that when we are dealing with leases, that we look at the fine details to make sure that we are not sold and deceived. This need for transparency is ever more important in this modern age, especially when we're dealing with bond covenants. Is this lease going to jeopardize all these bond covenants which the government is accountable for? We're talking about billions of dollars. You know, an economy that is still recovering, in which our people, our average citizen, is hardly making enough to survive the onslaught of inflation. I think we need to look at this really closely before we obligate our future generations to this deal. It's clear that there were other options available to build a hospital. This was not the only option. I think common sense, too, says, why would we put a hospital next to a missile defense system when we're going to spend billions of dollars on this project? Does that make any sense? If there's a reason, let it be known. We want to see the details. Because I can't consciously allow or agree to this deal. Part of the lease says, and I can quote it, the government, means the federal government, shall have the right to terminate the lease in whole or in part without liability, regardless of any lack of breach by the lessee of any terms and conditions. So what may seem, for those that are pushing this, a good deal, the federal government may change their mind in 5, 20 years. And if we sign this lease, they can get out of it without any liability issues, without having to pay back the millions, billions of dollars that our people are putting up. So let's see the details. What are we getting into? It doesn't make sense to me at this point, so I want to see convince me, convince all of us. To not do that is not getting our consent. Why would I sign something when I don't know what I'm getting into, what our people are getting into? This deal will outlast many of our lives. We're beholding the next generation to potentially a bad deal, and our people have experienced many of these bad deals. If we can only turn back the clock, we would not have signed that 99-year lease, that 50-year lease. If we only knew what's happening in the future, if we can see through this crystal ball and see what a bad deal this was, maybe we could have done something back then. Now we're faced with this deal. And to me, it doesn't sound right. It doesn't feel right. All we're asking is, what are the details that make it such a great deal for those that are really pushing it? As simple as that. Consent. This is one of the taboos of indigenous people. You're breaking this bond to our land, to our heritage. The rhetoric of this issue has taken on the position that places our people a step behind in demanding accountability from the military. Our people have been fighting since World War II for the return of our lands. And this hospital issue has led the military to take the stance that there is no more excess land to be returned. So things are shifting in order to try to get the consent, manufacturing the consent of the populace. But many of us know that it doesn't feel right. We need to see more details. And again, this is not going to stop building of a hospital. We all want to build a new hospital. We need to build a new hospital. There are many other options. Why don't we look at those options? And if anybody reads through the lease, you'll find there are many red flags. It is not a good deal for the people. It only protects the other party more than it does protect the people of Guam. So again, if it is such a good deal, let us see it, convince us. That's what this bill does. We need to vet it like we vet all bond covenants, all bond borrowing, which could be jeopardized by this, by the way. So thank you, Madam Speaker. I rise in support of this override.
Thank you, Senator Perez. On the override of vetoed bill number 12-37, Senator Fisher, you are recognized.
Thank you, Madam Chair. An earlier speaker said that, I guess in his opinion, we need to move with urgency on this matter. Something that has often been told to me, and I think is true, that if we act in haste, we have all the time in the world to repent. So let's not act in haste. There is a false feeling of urgency here that we need to get this done, and we need to get this done right now. I would just ask the members here, all 15 of whom, by the way, supported this bill, who they believe created the urgency. I don't think anybody in this chamber created the urgency. No one in this chamber lit the candle. No one in this chamber created the fuse. This happened elsewhere. This lease was not sketched out on the back of a cocktail napkin between the Admiral and Governor Lilian Guerrero one night. This lease has been percolating. This lease has been moving forward in the dark for probably, I would guess, at least 2 years. At no point, in my awareness, Was anyone in this chamber invited to participate in the discussions as this thing was being born? We had no say. For 2 years, it was enshrouded in fog and mystery. It comes forward, and we are told that we better act. The clock is short. There is an emergency, and it is an emergency not of our creation. I don't want to dance to that particular tune. When I ran for office, I expressed to people, as I asked for their vote, I expressed to people that I would be responsible as a senator. I expressed to people that I would be responsible with their pocketbook as a senator. And based on that request from me to assume the responsibility, and based on the gift of that responsibility from the people of Guam to me, I promised again that I would look after the purse. Because of this false emergency, I am now being asked to disregard the purse and rely on a representation of an organization that didn't think it appropriate to enter into an agreement which would cost well over $1 billion, and as one of my colleagues observed, will be dead, and this will still keep percolating. We will be dead, and our grandchildren will still be wondering why they are paying for this thing. I say thing because we don't even know what it looks like. Some members of this body, I believe, are comfortable with spending $1 billion on a thing which we don't see, a thing which we have no role in its creation. I don't think that's appropriate. I intend to keep the promise I made to the people of Guam when I said I would be responsible. I will not abjure my responsibility to look after the people's purse. No one here is saying we are standing in the way of a hospital. No one here is saying that a hospital similar to this won't ultimately come to fruition. What we are saying is before we pay the bill, we want to see it. That is entirely reasonable. I know that to be entirely reasonable because 15 people in this legislature just a few weeks ago supported this bill. 15 people said we want the right to look at leases over 5 years of land devolving from the federal government. Entirely reasonable to do so. Now we're in a situation where people are actually rising, at least a person, one of my colleagues has risen in opposition to a representation that the colleague also would protect the people's purse. I don't know why the weather has shifted so dramatically in the intervening weeks. I see no change in circumstance. I see no external or internal event which would cause somebody to change their minds. Yet here we are where people are doing just that with no rational explanation for it. There was no rational explanation for the governor even to veto this bill, unless a change in political philosophy has arisen in which the legislature is no longer welcome in the discussion of the budget and the expenditure of the money. I don't see that shift in the weather. I don't see that shift in political philosophy. I see just the opposite. At this time of recovery, at this time when we are considering pay raises, at this time when we are considering any number of things which are directly affecting the budget, directly affecting the financial health of Guam, directly affecting the financial health of our families, this is not the time to close our eyes and ask someone to come in and just start scooping coins out of the bank vault. There's not an infinite amount of money, there's a finite amount of money, and each of us in this chamber has a responsibility to guard that money. Now, Madam Speaker, there was just Madam Chair, there was just one other point I wanted to bring up. This fog-enshrouded lease was not given to us. In fact, ma'am, I actually had to issue a Freedom of Information Act request to get the lease. A senator, not just me, I don't take it personally, a senator had to demand, pursuant to law, that we receive the lease that is putting us on the hook for $1 billion. Wrap your head around that. If we are so proud of this lease, if this is such an efficacious and good deal for the people of Guam, then why wasn't it trumpeted? What a score. We have really got a good deal here. We're going to get a hospital, et cetera, and so forth. Why was it enshrouded? Why was it kept in the dark? Why were we required to insist upon receipt? Frankly, I was worried that Adelaide wouldn't produce the lease and it would force us to actually sue. Well, we did receive a lease of sorts. The lease does not contain any information about financing. The lease contains no specifications about what it is we are buying. We don't know what the assisted living facility is going to consist of under the lease. We don't know what the hospital is going to consist of under the lease. We don't know what any of the laboratories are going to look like under the lease. There are no specifications, none. A specification is nothing more than a description of what it is you bought. We don't know. We just don't know. How are we going to pay for it? We don't know. That's not in the lease either. It would be madness to sign this lease without having adequate oversight. It's as simple as it is. That's bottom line. I look forward to casting a vote in favor of the override. Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you, Senator Fisher. On the discussion of the override of the veto of Bill number 12-37, Senator Barnett, you are recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I prayed last night. I prayed that God would guide my words, which are coming from my heart, to change the minds of my colleagues who just weeks ago voted in support of this measure, unanimous support of this measure. And despite what's being said on the floor, what's been said in the media, I believe that this measure had unanimous support because it was a very simple issue in front of us, and the issue was not to kill the new hospital. The issue was not to oppose the building of a new hospital. The issue was that this body do its job. That we read the fine print, because the devil's always in the details. That we take this proposal and all of its pieces, many of which remain in the dark, out of reach, and we go through it. And we fulfill the obligation and responsibility that we have to the people of Guam, not to the governor of Guam. And I want to strip away all the layers of this issue. I don't want to talk about ancestral landowners. I don't want to talk about the return of excess lands. I just want to talk about the issue that's in front of us. It's the deal of a lifetime. It's a win-win situation. We must act now. Why? Why must we act now? Why is this the deal of a lifetime? Why is this a win-win situation? Yet those who ask those questions were not met with details or debate. They were met with name-calling. There wasn't even a good reason, I believe, that this measure and the other measure that was overridden, I don't think we got a good reason as to why they were vetoed. Because when you look at why we had unanimous support for this measure, I believe it's because we knew on that day that we cast those votes that we have a responsibility to vet this proposal, to find out if it truly is the deal of a lifetime, to find out if we truly must act now. I don't think this is quite the opportunity everyone thinks it is. But that's just me. How would we know? Many of us trust, but some of us don't want to trust and verify, and that's our responsibility to the people of Guam. I believe the cost and the risk of this billion-dollar healthcare complex that we're going to build on land that isn't even ours, on land that we're going to be leasing, on land that the military can take back on a whim without even providing a good reason. I believe this proposal will benefit the military community more than it benefits the civilian community. I believe the people of Guam will shoulder the cost of this billion-dollar healthcare complex. Previous speakers have said that we're going to avail of federal funds. I didn't see that anywhere. I didn't see that anywhere in this lease. I didn't see it anywhere. And I don't think that we're paranoid for asking questions. Maybe the ones who are paranoid are the ones who are pushing our backs against the wall. The ones who are saying if we don't build this hospital here and now, if we don't agree to it, if we don't comply with the Admiral's orders that he has put forth, that he has spoken to the media and told us he's not in the business of waiting around. I don't think asking why is saying no. I think it's our job to ask questions. And I think if this administration and my colleagues in this body truly believe that this is the best deal for the people of Guam, let's see it. I want to know why this is the deal of a lifetime. I want to know why we must act now. Even if I don't think we should. I want to be compelled by the arguments of the governor and her team. I want to hear why they think that senators and the public who have a right to know what's contained in this lease, in this proposal, why they think that's risky. What is in this proposal that creates risk if we're to go through it page by page? I too am more than willing, after we override this veto, to have the governor and her team and even the Admiral, who found his way to the legislature several times this year, yet claimed that the legislature never picked up the phone to ask him anything about this deal. When I would say, we've seen him about 10 times this year, he hasn't said a word. Why? Why don't they want us to know what's contained in this lease? Why don't they want us to do our jobs? That's really what this is about. It's about doing our job. When we're standing on the edge of a cliff about to obligate the people of Guam to commitments that will last well beyond our lifetimes, possibly well beyond the lifetimes of my children. We have to do our job. And if we throw the lights on this proposal, and we hear from the governor and all the people who are pushing this proposal, and they tell us why they think it's a good deal for the people of Guam, why we must act now, why it's a win-win situation, I think they have nothing to lose. We could even end up approving this deal after we override this veto, after we have the conversation that should have been had many times over the last couple years. I was very proud on the day that we unanimously supported this measure and the other measure we're seeking to override. I was proud of you all when we went into emergency session and we addressed the state of our schools. I was proud when we went into special session. Even though there's a great difference of opinions with the 15 of us, I'm proud of the work we have been able to accomplish in such a short time. And I think we can do it again. If we just honor the commitment that we made to the people of Guam, the commitment we made to make sure that we move forward, not with urgency, not rushing headfirst into the unknown, but moving forward with careful consideration, with thoughtfulness, with mindfulness. I'm committed. If we override this veto, I'm committed to listening to all of the details about the proposal that have not been shared with the public, with the legislature. I'm committed to listening to all of it with an open mind. I'm committed to being mindful of the deadline that the Admiral has placed on the people of Guam. That's my commitment. And everything we've done, I've spoken very strongly. I've stated my opinions on the record. But I always listen to reason. And I'm compelling the governor, lieutenant governor, if we're successful in this override, let's have that conversation. Convince us, as a previous speaker said. Because if it's a great deal for the people of Guam, then we could very well end up supporting it. But again, there's so many questions that I think deserve to be answered. We saw this morning the Guam Medical Association wrote a letter in opposition to the site of the new hospital in Manilao. I'll quote from this letter: "We need a functional, practical new hospital, not a jointed public health complex along with physician offices." They say that the concept of a medical city like we see in the Philippines won't work here on Guam. And that building a new hospital elsewhere would provide great access to all of the people of Guam and healthcare providers and continue to allow shorter time for transport of critical patients. And these are the doctors that we're going to rely on to staff this hospital. These are going to be the doctors that we're going to rely on to meet the many requirements, the many conditions that have been handed down from Joint Region Marianas that we in this body, at least most of us, don't even know about. So many people have questions, and we all deserve to have those questions answered. But first things first, nothing has changed. Nothing has changed since the day we voted unanimously to pass this measure. We are in the exact same position we were on that day. That day that we recognized, that day that we rose in unison to reaffirm our obligation, our responsibility to the people of Guam that we serve. We were all in agreement that we wanted to know just what we were getting into. Even if you disagree with me, and I'm sure many of you do, I just ask that we remember why we're here. Vetting this lease, looking at this proposal, what it includes, but more importantly, what it doesn't include. That's exactly why the legislature exists. That's exactly why we're sitting here in this session hall today. It would be a disrespect to the many great leaders who have come before us, to the leaders who walked out on a military government because they wanted a change, because they believe that we, the people of Guam, were good enough to make decisions for ourselves, to make decisions outside of the influence of the United States military. I pray that when we vote on this measure, that you vote not based on party lines or promises made, but that you vote with your conscience and remember your commitment that we made on the campaign trail to the people of Guam, that we would do our job, that we would take it serious, and that we would make sure that we always know what we're getting into. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Thank you, Senator Barnett. Senator Duenas, you are recognized.
Sidus Masi, Madam Chair. In order to not be duplicative of a lot of the great points that have been made by our colleagues who are in support of this override, and realizing that my good colleague, the retiring speaker, just read excerpts from the testimony provided to us today from the Guam Medical Association. I think every word of this needs to be read into the record, simply because there was a representation during the public hearing on this legislation that doctors were polled, and I guess there was some differences in terms of what the understanding of what the doctors actually thought. This letter is very well written, and I believe it was contemplated. So I'm going to read this into the record, Madam Chair. This letter is on the letterhead of the Guam Medical Association. It's dated March 20th, 2023. It's addressing the 37th Guam Legislature, and it is in opposition to the proposed site of a new hospital in Mangilao. Dear Honorable Speaker Therese Terlahi and fellow Honorable Senators, on behalf of the Guam Medical Association, we write in opposition, and that's written in caps, of the proposed site of the new medical campus in Mangilao. The Guam Memorial Hospital Authority Medical Executive Committee, acronym MEC, already stated previously that they support the construction of a new hospital, but does not support, in caps, the proposed site in Mangilaw, Eagles Field, and prefers the site to be in Tumuning. The Medical Executive Committee consists of all the providers, to include all providers employed by the Guam Memorial Hospital and the providers in the community who have privileges at GMH. The Guam Medical Association is the largest independent professional healthcare provider organization on Guam, have discussed among us, and we firmly agree with MEC in their opposition to a hospital suggested site. We need a functional, practical new hospital, not a joined public health complex along with physician offices. The medical physicians building for primary care clinics is a concept implemented by the Philippines. However, this concept does not work in the United States and territories. Majority of private providers already have their own practices in the community. The Department of Public Health and Social Services and Behavioral Health Center have no interaction with GMH in the past during the pandemic regarding direct patient care. Therefore, the new hospital does not require a large area to be built on. There really are no reasons to have a coexistence of a new hospital, DPSS, and behavioral center. In fact, it's better to have these entities separate to decrease congestion. The new hospital in Tumuning would continue to provide great access to all the people of Guam and healthcare providers and continue to allow shorter time for transport of critical patients from private clinics to the hospital. Transferring patients to a higher level of care from clinics to the hospital is crucial and should be done in minimal time. The two large private practices, FHP and SDA, and majority of the private clinics, especially obstetric care, are located in Tumuning. Does every minute of the transfer matter to the patients and their families? Absolutely. Furthermore, majority of physicians reside in Tumuning, and they will not be able to make the suggested hospital site outside of their clinic and residence area. The new hospital will not be able to be fully self-staffed. They will still rely on community physicians for admissions and care of patients within the hospital. In addition, building a bigger hospital does not mean an increase in bed capacity for direct patient care. The shortage of bed capacity in Guam has always been due to a shortage of support staff, mainly the nursing staff, and not a shortage of physical bed or room. Large bed capacity in the new hospital will result in an increased number of empty rooms due to no support staff. Our nursing program at the University of Guam is unable to support the needs of our new hospital, and furthermore, a hospital near UOG does not make it more accessible, and it would not increase the quality of care for our residents. You will face an even greater shortage of medical staff if built at that distant site. It is well known that Guam has been always critically short on specialty care. Requirement of specialty care and primary care for an island of 160,000 in population is the biggest challenge. Specialists such as neurosurgeon, cardiac thoracic surgeon, neonatologist, cardiovascular surgeon, and other specialists need a larger population base for them to practice in order for them to keep up with their skills. Women 40 or older have minimal or no gynecological care for simple workups such as cancer screening and faces challenges in qualified physicians with no available surgical intervention, especially when they are diagnosed with gynecological cancer. The idea of building a state-of-the-art hospital to recruit specialists to Guam is unrealistic. It is not like the Field of Dreams, where if you build it, they will come. A perfect example, look at our own private hospital, GRMC. It is fully nationally certified hospital by Joint Commission and is a state-of-the-art hospital, but GRMC has problems recruiting and retaining specialists. GRMC will pay higher salary than the national average, including GMH, for their specialists, but they still have great difficulties on recruitment. Does GMH have the better ability to recruit specialists than GRMC? Absolutely not. And building a new hospital at the distant site will hinder access to care for patients. Some should ask questions. Is the real cost still $1 billion? And I'll make a statement on that right here, Madam Chair. When we were in the Committee of the Whole last year approving funding for the new hospital proposal, the GITA director and all of the directors that were here, the $1 billion at the time was barely enough for the hospital proposal. And they had stated that the acceleration costs and the additional cost, and this was, years ago, even when the Army Corps had put in the $740 million replacement cost, would it escalate by at least 40%? There's no question, Madam Chair, the real price tag for this complex, as proposed, is well over $2 billion. We know it was estimated that it was $1 billion on the proposed medical campus several years ago. Today, that figure must have exponentially grown, so the cost for medical campus, to include the public health and behavioral health, is so large that it is not being realistic to the real needs or the healthcare priorities for the people of Guam. The proposed current site of Manila, without addressing all these concerns, must be on the mind of any responsible leader or leaders and the people of Guam. Finally, before even attempting to build a new hospital, please realize that the current GMH is half the age of other hospitals in other island communities. And yet it is in a state of disrepair due to the lack of proper maintenance and care, compared to other hospitals that are over 100 years old and still functional and nationally accredited, and some even appear as new. So if the new GMH hospital is going to be built with the same mentality of how it's managed and maintained, it won't last long, and you will have wasted billions of dollars. We hope that you take these points at heart and vote appropriately for our people and our future generation. Sincerely, Pram Sullivan, GMA Executive Director, and Dr. Hoa Nguyen, MD, GMA Acting President. Madam Chair, this testimony demonstrates exactly why we need to scrutinize this lease proposal. Madam Chair, there have been proposals in this legislature, and many legislatures prior to this legislature put in a 5-year requirement for leases on government property and entities within the government of Guam having to justify why going beyond 5 years, that were far less voluminous than this proposal. Yet we stand here. We stand here because of not a self-imposed deadline. And this bill, primarily for that reason, the fundamental reason, the true fundamental reason, is to make sure that federal contracts here and going forward on federal excess lands, which is unprecedented, be scrutinized just like we will scrutinize every other piece of legislation on our own government land. Why would we change that process if we didn't change it in law for ourselves? This deadline has not been brought on to Guam by the people of Guam. And as my good friend Senator Tom Fisher said, this deadline is a false deadline from a lot of our perspectives. This whole thing seems to be twofold. It seems to be pushing this down the people of Guam's throat without knowing any of the details, and from many that I've spoken to, seems to be a follow the money issue. We all know that even when there's tens and hundreds of millions of dollars being discussed, there's a follow the money component. This is a $2 billion plus proposal. Follow the money. Madam Chair, one thing that's really perplexing to me, is it really true that our good federal government, that I've always supported in terms of the buildup and other good things that have happened on Guam, we've had our fits and starts. There's been things that have caused us anguish, but I've always been a true patriot and a true supporter. Is this really conditional on the issue of a federal lease? Madam Chair, just up the street, there's a beautiful building, a naval hospital, that used to be 150 beds. And I've had to go see loved ones up there when it was the old hospital. And that's one example of a building that was over 60 years old that looked brand new. The floors were shiny, the rooms were clean. But on every floor you went to there, you're lucky if you saw 5 patients, because that was a different time. And so when they built the new hospital, it's barely 50 beds now. As the Admiral says, during that time, they must not have seen that the Indo-Pacific was going to become so agitated. So whose problem are we solving? And if we're going to solve a problem that we already know that the military has, and we're going to do it in conjunction, why does it have to be under a federal lease? Why couldn't it be on another property? The Oka Point that's contemplated a lot of times, and if that had a helipad on it, is actually closer. And you don't have to fly over land or over a missile site to land a helicopter on a pad for mass casualties. The old hospital can be repurposed so that we have even a redundant system. So many things can be done. We can't talk about it though, Madam Chair, because we have to act now. The only way this makes sense, the only logical conclusion that you have to come to in this situation is those who have made these decisions don't want to talk about it. They want to impose deadlines. Our governor said, this is what I'm going to do, and be damned if it isn't done. I, for one, will not vote for that kind of coercion. I will vote for this override. Susan, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Senator Duenas. On the override of the veto of Bill number 12-37, any senator wishing to discuss? Senator Lujan, you are recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, it's talked about a win-win situation. Well, you know, this bill that I'm looking forward to voting and overriding, this veto, as I read what was leaked to us, again, without more information that is needed for a body to make good decisions for the future of Guam, this at least reminds me of what we have read, what I have read. This at least reminds me and makes me feel like we have a predator in the neighbor, and they never miss the opportunity to pillage us. You talk about a partnership, a win-win situation. How I wish that when I read what was leaked to us, that was really a win-win situation. I was looking for that. I was even looking in the very bottom, maybe disclaimers and all that on the side. maybe written in invisible ink or something like that. But nothing existed in a win-win situation with that. I was looking for the inafamolig, the good neighbor situation. I was looking for all that because, we quote that all the time. Admiral Nicholson quotes that all the time. Inafamolig. I was looking for that. Because that's what good neighbors do, and if they, if they're going to get into a lease agreement, and, a good neighbor, win-win situation, yeah, you would see that. That'll be even the heading, win-win. Because this lease, basically, when you look at it, a good neighbor will help us build a hospital in a way that benefits both of us. We build a hospital that we can both use when we need it. During peacetime, we use it. During national emergencies, we understand. We'll still be using it, but, we understand the national emergency situation. That's the island way. That's the Inafamalek way. To look for ways to make things good for both sides. But what I read, if I understood what I read, I almost couldn't believe what I was reading. This leads basically it said it's to grind us into the ground with terms that they know will put us at forever disadvantage and in debt for land that was taken under questionable circumstances in the first place. Just recently a bill was passed in Congress. How hard could it be for the military, the Navy in this sense, to access some of the trillions of dollars in infrastructure spending for our nation that he has already budgeted? I did see that. This is not the ineffable way. We are the frontline American community in the Western Pacific, Madam Speaker. Some of the nation's top generals are forecasting war in China in the next few years. While we all hope and pray that such war does not happen, we as a country, especially our island community, must be prepared when or if it comes. And in the Inafamalek way and all the missile defense systems, the 19 sites that are going to be here, on top of that agenda should be a hospital as well that again, not to pillage us. And this hospital should be a part of that effort to prepare ourselves. But it cannot be built if Admiral Nicholson and others, through a sleight of hand, wants to put the entire financial burden of doing so on our shoulders, and then add more to that burden by imposing land costs as well as the land they procured in questionable circumstances in the first place. Over the past few decades, Madam Speaker, we have called the Navy to be a good neighbor. And sometimes they have been. Sometimes they have not been. This proposed lease is one of those instances where they're acting like a predatory colonial master rather than our Navy and our military. And I suggest to Admiral Nicholson, dude, you must adjust this poor behavior and attitude and do so immediately. This is not about not wanting to build a hospital. We have a current site up there in Oka Point, where the old GMH was at. The current site where the hospital is at as well. I've always been an advocate for a public-private partnership with GRMC. The infrastructure is already there. So this is not about not all of us. There's not one person in this room, not one of 15 senators here that would say they're not in agreement of having a new hospital. It's this lease. Again, I was looking for good aspects of this. I was looking for the win-win situation in this lease. I was looking at how it could benefit both sides, the civilian and military side. I couldn't find it. If a provision exists, hasn't been forwarded to us. We haven't seen it. You know, the one thing I would like to, because again, as we've been labeled not wanting the hospital or anti-military or anti-this, we're saying, really? When we're asking for the details, and from what we've seen, this doesn't protect, this does nothing good for the people of Guam. We have the doctor's letters here, the Guam Medical Association letter not agreeing with the site. You know, and if this were such a great thing, okay? If this was such a great thing, this lease was such a great thing for the people of Guam, I just want to ask this one question. I just want to, the governor considered this scenario. If this lease were between the federal government and the Bank of Guam, if you were still president, and the lease is between the feds and the Bank of Guam, will you still sign this lease with these provisions? Your board of directors want you to do so? Your stockholders want you to do so? If these provisions exist, I don't think so. As a matter of fact, I know so. It wouldn't happen. Again, Madam Speaker, I rise in full support of the override of this bill. I've looked, and there are provisions out there that really made it a win-win situation. Maybe I missed that paragraph. Maybe it's in the missing attachments. But if it's such a good thing, we would have it in front of us with all these good things. If it's such a good thing, we wouldn't have this letter from the Guam Medical Association saying, no. If it is truly a good thing and a win-win situation, why is it all on our shoulders? Why is it all in the people of Guam? All on our shoulders. Again, a good neighbor wouldn't do that. Really? Admiral Nicholson, this is a really good thing? This is the ineffable that you talk about? I think it's more famalik myself. Take care of yourself rather than us. So with that, Madam Speaker, I rise in full support again of the override of this bill, and I encourage my colleagues to vote for the override as well. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Thank you, Senator Lujan. On the veto override of Bill number 12-37, Senator Brown, you are recognized.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. You know, in a very short time, we're going to be sitting going through the budget for this upcoming fiscal year. We're going to be having public hearings. We're going to have departments come down and members of the public come down and provide testimony with regards to how we should spend what is now close to $1 billion. It'll be a little more now that we've added on this last week, additional $50 million to the budget. And you know, that's the process. It's ensuring publicly that the people of Guam know how their money is being spent. Because we're always reminded, it is their money. We exist here by their grace, by their vote, by their decision that those of us that are here at this moment in time are here to represent their interests. That's why we go out there, you know, every other year, you know, Maniluhuz and Maninahu Tau Guam. We ask for their support, their trust, their consideration, their vote. Can you just please spare me one vote? Because I'm here to represent you. I'm here to represent your interest. I'm here to protect you. And then when we get in office, sometimes we find that's not the reality. And sometimes people decide after a while, and sometimes very quickly, that maybe perhaps we're not who should represent them, or we're not representing them well. It's unimaginable, Madam Speaker, that we're here today even debating this bill. You know, as I mentioned, I've said that before, and I'm going to say it again. I don't know if we're products of our colonial history when you see things like this happen. What are we really doing here? Are we going to build a hospital for the people of Guam? Are we going to address the issue of the land takings and the fact that, you know, our people have had their land taken, and of all the places on this entire island that we could site this hospital, we want to site it on property that was taken from our people? And deal with that history and that controversy, which for many of our people is still one that is very offensive. Even if your land was not taken, just the fact that this happened. You know, it's one of those unfortunate things in our history that are not pleasant to look back at. Because so much of the land on Guam was taken by the military after the war, and certainly understandable, our people were grateful. I'm sure my grandparents and family members were. But the fact that this becomes part of the discussion of constructing a new hospital for the future of our people is disturbing. Because somebody else is making the decision that the hospital has to be sited at Lalo. Now, the other thing that gets thrown in the pot is now we're going to partner with the military to build a new hospital. What are the details of that? What is the cost to the taxpayers of Guam with regards to that? Or is the military going to contribute? And is it in the best interest of our civilian community to have this partnership with the U.S. military for the construction of a hospital? Where are the priorities going to be? Already our people are concerned about the quality of health care that they receive on Guam for themselves and their families. We've heard the jokes over the years about the Guam Memorial Hospital. But I'll tell you, many of our people have been born there, and many of our family and friends have died there. Not in a negative way, some argue because, oh, they didn't get good care, but others just in the course of life, it was their time because of age and illness. And while we like to think maybe, you know, if anything serious happened, we're going to go off island, well, sometimes God doesn't give us that time. Sometimes what happens is instantaneous, and you don't have that option. But our focus has always been, how do we improve where we are with our own hospital, with our GMH? How do we make it better? How do we make it so we can provide basic health care to our people? There's the challenge. There's what should be the focus, especially if we're looking to the future, to want to see how can we improve upon that. But we should be making those decisions. The people of Guam should be involved in making those decisions, especially when the expectation is that they ultimately are going to pay for it. Whatever federal money the governor's setting aside, if we're going to go on estimates, is a drop in the bucket. So how's the rest of it going to get paid? And why is that the priority when right now the existing infrastructure at GMH is in need of improvement? Goodness, we found recently their cyber system is something that has needed some focus and attention. Certainly a lot of money could have been thrown to that to avoid that particular issue. We can't do what we need now for our people with regards to our existing healthcare system. But instead of focusing on how we're going to address that, we're distracted with all these other issues because the governor decided that she's going to enter into this arrangement with the military, and after the fact, we're somehow just supposed to ride along. That's not how democracy operates. And the Admiral, I enjoyed my interactions with the Admiral, very pleasant. I mean, just a couple of weeks ago, we were on tour of the new Camp Blas with him. But I did hear his interview the day after the State of the Island, where he said, well, no senator called him. Well, I think we would have called had we known these discussions were going on. But that's not our position to have to call him. He's not in charge of the rest of Guam. He's in charge for running his operations on the bases here. And that's his jurisdiction, and that's his place to address, as he should. But when it involves our people, our resources, our people's future, then by all means, it should be us that have direct engagement in that process. And we don't need to call anybody else for that. We need to have that discussion right here, in the light of day, in the people's house. All that will happen, my dear colleagues, if we do not stand up as a body to vote for this override, is this issue will get more complicated. Because I don't know how the governor plans on paying for the full cost of this facility. I really don't know. Or all of a sudden we're going to get calls to, hey, we need to fund this. Hey, you need to approve this in the budget. Hey, you need to do this. Hey, you need to do that. Jump, skip. How high shall we jump? If we do not address our most fundamental basic responsibilities, we have no business being here. Absolutely no business being here, because I'll tell you, our people are very direct too. They can be cordial, they can be pleasant, they can smile at you, and then there are days they're just going to tell you exactly what they think. Maybe some of us are willing to take that. Maybe some of us might have shorter careers than others. But I don't think you're ever going to lose siding on the side of our people. When you take the other side, good luck. I don't know what's so complicated about that. I really don't. This cowering to the administration because the governor wants this. That's nice. Well, let's talk about it. But we haven't had that conversation. We simply had a State of an Island a few weeks ago, and we were told, this is what I'm going to do. Whoop-de-doo, the heck with the rest of you. And that just ain't how democracy operates, especially when the intent is to obligate our people and offend them at the same time. That's just not how we should operate in the people's house. And it doesn't end, really, colleagues, if you don't override. This doesn't end here. This will be a badge we're all going to wear the rest of this term and beyond. Because the distinction is going to really be made. Whose interests are you protecting? Whose interests are you representing? Are you representing my interest, or are you representing the governor's interest? Because I can't believe any of us are going to argue, oh, we're representing the military's interest. When for so many years, many before us, many greater legislators than even us have stood on this floor and have advocated for the interests and the rights of our people to govern and have and own their own land. But why in particular does it have to be at Lalu? And who made that decision? And who made that decision that we need to partner with the military with the construction of our civilian hospital? The military has far more resources that they can access and that literally are at their fingertips. to expand their capabilities with their existing facility if they needed to. Gosh, one fighter pilot plane. Gosh, one plane. One plane could help pay for a brand new hospital expansion to their existing facility. Nothing to stop them from doing that. Because they didn't plan or prepare. I think Senator Lujan and I are the only two who were here back then with Admiral Brewer up on the Hill when they were downsizing. And we're sitting there going, what, why, how? I can't get it. There's the map of the world right there. There's Guam, and you're telling me you guys are going to downsize this major part, this little dot in the middle of the Pacific? And mothball, and you're telling us how and why you're downsizing, and, let's just all have a nice day. It's good to talk to you. And look at what has happened to the world since then. I don't know who's doing their military strategy planning, but wow, I think somebody missed the boat somewhere. How everything has changed, and now they're not as prepared as they need to be, but they could be very quickly. Things move very quickly, when money moves, things can happen very quickly. But how and where that goes with regards to the military facility and their hospital, that's them to decide. How and where our hospital for our people, our dear people of Guam that we talk to and love so much. But man, when the time comes to make the decisions, to make the right decisions on their behalf, why is it so difficult to do that? Why is it so difficult to do the right thing? Sorry, the time ran out. You better put it back on because we might have World War III here in the session hall. This should not be that difficult to do because there's a lot of work that needs to be done. The fact that key members of our community, including the medical community, I don't always agree with them, but in this particular case, I agree with them. There's a lot of infrastructure that's already been put in place. And we're not going to provide our people better medical support by locating the hospital away from where their center of activity is. And then, the new hospital, my goodness, all the time and focus was put in, we're going to build a new private hospital, and that's going to resolve all our issues. I was there at DPW when the new hospital was being constructed. And now it doesn't even seem to be a thought in the discussion. Maybe the hospital ain't so in these days, I don't know. Don't hear much about them, don't seem to care, I guess. Instead of how are we going to partner collectively with the resources that are here to provide better medical care in our community. I have no interest in the new hospital. I don't have any stock in it. But you got to wonder, one of those moments are people go, funny, what's going on? Whose interest is being represented? Is it mine? I always ask people, make sure, look beyond. Look beyond what you see and find out who's this being done for. Is it being done for you? Is it being done for someone? Who's got that deal? Who's going to make money on that project? I got to ask, who's going to make money on this project? Who's intending to be the company that's going to construct this new hospital? Because a lot of those deals get cut in the back door and they don't see the light of day. And in this particular case, Madam Speaker, like I said the other day, not only did it get made behind closed doors, it got made in the dark. And that's the danger. If this is how we're going to move forward in making decisions, or the lack of our ability to make decisions because we choose not to stand up for the people we say we're here to represent. My dear people of Guam, well, if we're going to make decisions on their behalf, we need to make it in the light of day, and we definitely need to make it with the lights on so that they know what we're doing on their behalf. To do anything short of that, to acquiesce to the demands of the administration that calls us paranoid. Sometimes I don't know who's doing their writing for them. I don't know how the government even allows those things to be put in paper that she signs. I'm beginning to wonder who's really paranoid. Because that kind of vitriol of writing that comes out of there, and then they expect us to sort of follow along their direction of leadership as if that's the way to go. And then when you don't agree with them, oh my gosh, you're a target for attack. Your family's a target for attack. And boy, don't they love to just spread that garbage on social media. They're all aimed at those that don't support them, that don't bow to them, that don't kowtow to them. Well, I don't think you can run and stand here and ask to represent the people of Guam and kowtow to anyone. Our priority should be here to represent the interests of our people. I'm certainly standing up to represent our people, Madam Speaker, and I'm voting for the override of this bill. Thank you very much for the opportunity to comment.
Thank you, Senator Brown. On the override of vetoed bill number 12-37, Senator Nicholas, you are recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Been in politics already, 3 months now? And, you know, if it's a Republican measure, the Democrats don't like it, and if it's a Democrat measure or Republicans and whatever. And it's been a recurrent theme. I just want to do what is right, you know? How about optimism? Everybody talking down this hospital. As leaders, I think we should offer people optimism. Someone wants to build you a hospital and get the federal government to help pay for it. What a wonderful thing. What a wonderful thing. Could it be that it's just a Democratic governor proffering this and that makes it not right? I love cooperation between us and the military. That is my military. That is your military. I have a son who is a Marine. He may use this hospital. I have an Army officer daughter who may use this hospital. The whole entire island civilians will use this hospital. And one of the reasons why I think cooperating and working with the military is because of the threats that we're facing. Not only that, my father passed away almost a decade ago, and he was rushed to Naval Hospital. Never once served a day in the military. This is way before I had a business and way before I was in politics. And he slipped away at Naval Hospital. One of the most dignified things I've ever seen, getting treated at a military hospital. We saw that he already had slipped away, but the nurse came out and gave him a warm blanket. Very, very dignified. And it happened up at Naval Hospital. And here we have a chance to replicate this partnership for our own people. And I listen here again and again and again and again, ways to kind of hinder our cooperation. Someone wants to build you a hospital? I'm for it. Someone says we want a partnership with the military, we want to work together, let's do it. That's my military, it's your military. We are going to be facing something very critical in the next couple of years, and it's not of our doing. But when things start to fly around, maybe having a new hospital in partnership with the military is not such a bad thing. And so, got a call from the governor today, and she mentioned, I called her because one of the great things, I had a constituent call me up yesterday, and she goes, out of the 14 people that are down there at the legislature, I think if I wanted the truth, I could get it from you. And so the governor calls me today because I messaged her, I want to know everything. I want to know, why should I support this override? And she says, it's a good thing. And it's a good thing because we're going to work with partnership with the military, and they are going to help us build this hospital. They're going to help pay for this hospital. I was mulling it over, $1 billion for a brand new hospital. I'm a businessman. That's 1/6 of our GDP. I think our GDP is at $6 billion now. It's 1/6 of our GDP. If Warren Buffett was here, he would say that's no problem. It's only 1/6 of your GDP. But with the potential threats that we're going to be facing in the future and the perceived working together in tandem with the military to help us build this hospital, I don't think it's such a bad idea. And therefore, I'm opposed to this override. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Nicholas. On the override of vetoed bill 12-37, Senator Blas, Minority Leader, you are recognized.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. And thank you to my colleagues for all the concerns they brought. And I too, when sitting and listening to what was presented with regard to this effort to override this veto, listen intently. And one of the things that I wanted to bring to, I want to be able to spend my time bringing us back to what this is about. This is an act that would require for the legislature, approval from the legislature before the government of Guam can enter into any lease or purchase of property owned by the federal government or any other entity for a term in excess of 5 years. There's nothing here that says before we can purchase or enter into any lease agreement for a proposed hospital. In fact, there's nothing in the body of the legislation that was passed by this body that says anything about a proposed medical complex. This, in fact, is just a bill that affirms what our role is, what our responsibility is as a legislature. Another interesting fact is that this bill was introduced on January 24, 2023. Way before we were informed that any lease agreement for the property was nearing completion, and oh, by the way, there's a deadline to sign. Way before that. I commend the author of this legislation in her foresight of recognizing that in order for us to fulfill our obligations and our responsibilities as a body, that we should take a look at leases that are going to indenture us, that are going to indebt us, that could possibly indebt us for a number of years. Don't we do that anyways? I venture to say that there may be a bill based on some news reports that I've read that may require us to be able to authorize the government to exercise eminent domain for 40 square feet of property so that they can complete a roadway. 40 square feet. and it has to come to us for approval. What's the difference? We've seemed to have mired ourselves, surrounded ourselves in thinking that this is primarily for the construction of a medical facility. My colleagues, this bill is to ensure that before we speak in behalf of the people of Guam and we indebt or we provide a debt to the people of Guam for a lease or for a purchase of any land, that it goes through this scrutiny and, for lack of a term, the approval of this body. It's going to be kind of interesting because as the discussions go forward in the building and the construction of a facility or much less a hospital, you're going to have to come to us and ask for us for permission to use the money. But again, that's our job. So why we're wrapped around an issue of whether or not we're going to do our jobs, that's ludicrous. This is about our basic function. And if we're going to neglect that, if we're going to say, no, it's not, that is not what we have been tasked to do. Further, there's nothing in this legislation that says that anything that comes before this body, whether it be for the construction of a medical facility or for the completion of a roadway project, that it's going to automatically be rejected. What this says is that before we spend any money, we go through the scrutiny, we go through the questions, we go through the inquiry that we do with any other spending measure, any other measure where the government wants to spend money or wants to obligate the people of Guam. Nothing more. So if you fear that by passage of this bill, by enacting this into law, is going to require you to get into the bushes, into the nuts and bolts of why you want this agreement, because there are things that you don't want to expose or you want to hide until later, that we figure that this is not a good deal, then we know why you're scared. I have never worked, I've never seen, observed any governor who did not want to indebt our people for any amount, not want to stand, and not want to be able to discuss in detail what they would like to do, except this one. No lease agreement, no purchase that is going to affect the people of Guam should be enacted or should be promulgated or should be signed without people knowing about it. I, for one, am curious. Why is it that the nuts and bolts, why is it that the details that are truly necessary for this lease agreement, why is this going to be held back from us and from the people of Guam until after it's signed? That's because after it's signed, there's no more voice. You're going to have to accept it. It's basic household budgeting. It's basic agreements. It's our basic responsibility as a legislature to ask the questions that need to be asked, whether it be for this lease or any future lease. I don't even know why we need this piece of legislation. It should be something that becomes natural. It should be something that becomes inherent. I don't see any logical, common sense reason not to override this veto. And for that, Madam Chair, thank you for the opportunity to speak. I ask for my colleagues' consideration and support of this override so that we can, in behalf of our people, whether it be this lease or any future lease, they know, they can have confidence that what we're getting into is something that's truly beneficial and that we can afford it. Thank you very much, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Senator Blas, Minority Leader Blas. On the notwithstanding motion to override the veto of Bill number 12-37. Speaker Terlahi, you may close.
Thank you. And I want to thank my colleagues for their very eloquent remarks for and against the override. And really especially want to thank those who stayed in the room the entire time to hear each other. I think it's very important that we do that. This is something that has not been fully vetted before the people of Guam, and that's what we're trying to do by this override. Again, if the Bill 12 is overridden, the hospital is still going to be built, it is still going to be an urgent matter, and that doesn't in any way lessen the legislature's commitment to funding a hospital or the urgency with which we must all work together. It specifies a mechanism of how we will collaborate. So there's no further misunderstanding or perceived hidden agenda. An override will benefit the people of Guam because it will mandate that a light be shined. It will bring public input and buy-in going forward. This can only benefit all of us in the government. The proposed lease of the federal land can be reviewed with haste. And if we want to continue to negotiate with the military for use of land that it controls, we can do that. Let's do that. That's what this bill does. It would show the people of Guam the terms of a proposed lease, what's in there and what's not in there, and what we will owe, most importantly. The promise of federal funds is nowhere in this bill or in the draft lease that's floating around, that's the subject of a lot of discussion. And if that is a consideration, then let's see it. The military colleagues, they are not building our hospital for us. We are building it. The people of Guam are building it. At least that's the documents that we've been shown. And if there are any other documents again, let's see it. It's the people of Guam who are going to bear the debt. They're going to provide the maintenance. They're going to provide the staffing. They're going to suffer the liability. And a Veterans Care Clinic is owed to our veterans. But do we need to give more land for them to deserve that? Do we need to pay for it ourselves to honor that obligation to our veterans? Let's not mix up the issues here. There's only 161 beds in the new hospital, according to Matrix. We have 158 right now and 40 at the SNU. And we're maxed out. Can we please vet whether we can accommodate our growing population, the increased workforce that was predicted in the EIS, and any other military obligations with 161 beds? I don't care who gets the credit for a new hospital, and I don't care who's running for governor in 4 years or thereafter. I care that the people of Guam deserve a new hospital and are almost desperate for one. But they do not deserve to be held hostage on a lease with unknown terms and given a 30-day deadline to lose land again. We can build a hospital without losing. We can make a good deal while we commit our resources. And no senator or legislature or agency or governor should be pressured into consenting to unknown military requirements and unknown financial commitments simply because someone is giving us a 30-day ultimatum and reneging on previous commitments by the Secretary of the Navy along the way. The legislature should review proposed leases with the federal government. That's what an override would do. We are the representatives of the people of Guam. Please, colleagues, stand firm on behalf of the people of Guam. Override the veto, and let's vet any leases that the governor wants to propose with the federal government. Let's vet those expeditiously, let's vet those fairly, but let's vet those. Let's see the obligation and the commitment that we are binding not ourselves, but all of the children of Guam and their children. That's how long these obligations are going to last. I ask you to stand firm in your initial response as to what is our job here. No one else will be able to vet federal leases if not the legislature on behalf of the people of Guam. So I'm asking you to please, don't shy away. This is not going to stop any hospital from being built. In fact, I completely expect a state-of-the-art facility for the amount of money and the commitment of resources that the people of Guam are putting into this medical complex. So I'm asking you, please, override the bill, require federal leases to be reviewed by the legislature, allow the public a chance to see what the terms are going to be that they are going to be bound to. And if the leases are good and the deals are good, then we will end up, as we always do, in a workable situation, a win-win situation, the best deal that we can get for the people of Guam. Thank you, Sidus Masi.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker.
I renew my motion that Bill 12-37 COR as amended be placed in the voting file for an override.
On the motion, hearing no objections, motion carries. Senator Parkinson.
I'd like to make a motion to recess till 3 p.m. for lunch.
Okay. Speaker Terlahi on the motion.
Yeah, on the motion, the voting files are ready. I would make a motion that we vote right away.
Point of inquiry. So the voting would be to vote on all items in the file because we have a pending resolution to discuss, Madam Chair.
All right. That's right. That's fine. I withdraw my motion.
Okay, thank you very much. We are in recess until We are in recess until 3 p.m.